Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. Dear friends of human rights, that's the way I see it. That's the way you came. And first of all, I would like to thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs for organizing this important event. We are living, I would say, difficult times. And the difficult times started with the pandemic, and it hit us in Europe very strongly. And this pandemic, or this crisis that was caused by the pandemic, started to open several issues, I would say. And as we see, we went into economic crisis, now we have an energy crisis, and there might be some crisis as a follow-up. But I think what we saw, it's important that if we cooperate, if we stick together, if we help each other, we are able to overcome any crisis much faster and much better. And I think this pandemic crisis showed it very, very well. When I look at the, you don't know, but I see the presentation on that side as well, and I see the name of the conference, it's called Protecting Human Rights. I would say we cannot stay by the statement of protecting human rights. We must develop human rights. Because this pandemic, and I think you will agree with me, showed one important thing. And it's not a good thing, that a lot of aggression came out of the people. We see media, social networks, and we see that the people somehow started to show their emotions as never before. We were not used to see so much emotions face to face as we see it on the social media. Yeah, there might be a sign of it that these are not always the human beings, that these are different computers, etc. But I think there are also people who showing much more emotions on the social media as they would be able to show it face to face. And this aggression is going against the human rights. And that's why it's so important to have meetings like this. And not just this meeting, but have a deeper discussion on human rights, on human dignity. Because at the end of the day, all of us, we are human beings. And we need to show respect to each other, just for the fact that we are human beings. There is no one more than the other one. We are all equal. And we need to develop this identity of people, not only in the developed world, but everywhere. But we see that the developed world is also facing challenges, and this pandemic showed it, that the human rights is not, I would say, generally respected. We see it here in Slovakia. And there is also misunderstanding of what actually is democracy, what is freedom. And it's so important, that's why it's so important to have meetings like this, and to discuss and to define all over again what is human dignity, what are human rights. So that's why I'm so glad that we could have this meeting, and we could have these discussions, and we could inspire other people in discussing this important topic. You know, our government, when we came in place, we said that we want to be a government of transparency. And the reason why transparency, I see transparency so important, because it's the great foundation for truth. We all know that the truth sets us free. And I will go now back to the transparency. Because transparency, I think, is the best environment. It's the environment of light. You see much better when there's light. And transparency is the light room, is the room full of light, where everybody can see what's going on. And public affairs are public affairs, not private affairs. Public affairs must be revealed to the public, to the people. It cannot go without transparency. And if somebody is conducting things according to the law, is conducting in the public interest, then he doesn't have to hide anything. Therefore, friends of transparency are people who are friends of truth. They will never hide. And it goes hand in hand, it's very related to the human dignity, to the human rights, because transparency, as I said, is the environment for the truth, whereas truth will be also place for respect, because that goes hand in hand again. You know, in politics, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Slovakia we hear this many times, that when you say 100 times a lie, it becomes a truth. We don't want this. I never want a lie to become a truth. I want truth to stay truth and lie stay lie. And that's why the transparency is important, because if you have an environment of transparency, lie will not be able to become a truth, because it will be revealed very quickly, very soon, that it's a lie, and then it has no chance to replace the truth. And the truth is much more visible in a transparent environment. I say this because these are the important foundations for protecting human rights and for developing human rights. Because it's like building a house. You can build it on a sand and you will never build it. Or you can build it on a rock or something solid. Then, if you start to build it on the rock, it develops much faster. And we need to always look at the ground, at the environment, at the foundation on which we build the values. I will help myself with a quote of Pope Francis, who was here on Slovakia just a month ago. And he said an important quote. He said that it's important to work on our future where the laws, the legislation will be equal for everybody, and it will be on the principle or on the foundation of justice. And he said that justice should never be for sale. I fully agree with it. And he said that justice cannot stay only an abstract idea, but it must be concrete as a bread. And therefore, it's important, or it's necessary to lead a fight against corruption. And that's the most important for ensuring rule of law. And I fully agree with this, because corruption is something that is melting or is changing the rock into a sand. That's why we say in Slovakia that the fight against corruption is not everything, but it's the beginning. Because if we have an environment where corruption is present and can live freely, then we are building a house on the sand, and we'll never build it. That's why Slovakia wasn't able to move forward in a fast way, because corruption was present so many years. And to get rid of corruption, don't be fools. It's not easy. We are not fools. We know it's not easy. It's not fast, but it's necessary. That's important, because some people say, oh, you know what, just get away from it. I mean, corruption will never end. I don't need corruption to end. I need corruption to decrease. Every year to decrease. That's what we focus on. We need to have ideals. We need to have ideals. Without ideals, we'll not succeed. But ideals are ideals. To achieve ideals, it takes a long time. But if we don't have them, then we don't have the progress. Aim high. It's a very good recommendation. And if we aim high, then we succeed. And we work hard. So, on this perspective, I would like to share with you 3 priorities of our government that go hand in hand in protecting human rights, but also are related to the freedom of speech, to the freedom of word, to the freedom of media. And that's the first priority. It's the freedom of media and the safety, the protection of reporters. As you know, even developed countries face great challenge where reporters unfortunately, were killed. It happened to Slovakia also in 2018. It's such a attack on democracy, on freedom, when somebody has to pay with his own life only by sharing the truth. That's where you see, and I go back to the transparency, I go back to the room full of light. That's where you see how much light do you have in your country. If somebody dares to kill a reporter, that means you don't have much light in your room. And that was the reflections to Slovakia. And we should not forget, it's only 3 years ago. 3 years ago. We cannot forget. We have so much work ahead. When you look at the Second World War, we had just celebrated several occasions that happened, drastic things that happened during the Second World War. And we still repeat and remember and commemorate to these acts that were done. And I will go back to that in my third point. But the killing of Jan Kuciak and his fiancée, it was such a strong and devastating thing that we have to have this in mind, not for next 2 years, not for next 10 years, forever, because we don't want this to repeat. And we always have to evaluate whether we have more light in the room or the same or less. And we have to make sure that we always have more light in the room, so there is so transparent environment that this will never repeat. And that's why the freedom of media is so important. And that's why we also do prepare changes in the legislation. But it's also about how the politicians behave, how the politicians speak about the freedom of media, whether they respect it or it's not convenient for them. You know, I'm in the politics for 5 years. Yes, having reporters behind your back or on your neck, or as we say, it doesn't matter. It's not pleasant, but we don't do politics because it's pleasant. We do politics because we want to move our countries forward, because we do want to serve our citizens. If somebody doesn't take politics as a service to his citizens, then he's on the wrong path. He's on the wrong path. If somebody starts to enjoy his position in the politics, in democracy, then he's not living democracy anymore. He wants to be a ruler. We don't need rulers in democracy. We need servants in democracy. That's what it's about. And nobody is pushed to be a politician in the democracy. If you win, if you wish, go. If you don't want to do it, do something else. But once you do it, never, and be very careful that you don't become a ruler. We don't need rulers in democracy. We want servants in democracy. And if they are servants, they will respect, and they will respect the reporters. And if we have respect in the society, the language, the public language, or the language in the society will change. I guarantee you, it will change. And that's my goal and goal of our government. The second thing I already mentioned, the second priority, is the fight against corruption. One thing is the legislation, but then it's police, prosecutors, judges, everybody must be objective, must conduct everything legally. We have a track record in Slovakia, and that people weren't obeying the laws in their action in these positions. Those people now are being arrested, and they themselves say what they did, where they were going astray. And these are important examples, not of of good practices or best practices, but of worst practices or bad practices. But those practices are important too, because we learn sometimes on our own mistakes and sometimes on somebody else's mistakes. But we must learn on mistakes. And that's why it's important that the environment, that the atmosphere in Slovakia is changing. Yeah, it's turbulent. It's not pleasant. Again, I say this word because sometimes we have the feeling that life must be pleasant, but usually it's not. I mean, there are pleasant moments, but in general, there's a lot of challenges, but these challenges are making us better. So the fight against corruption, we do it legally, we do it through changing the legislation. We have the Minister of Justice here. She's putting a lot of effort into changing all the legislation, into developing new standards. We have a new judiciary board. I don't know if that's the right term in English, but we had a new election of the general prosecutor, special prosecutor, etc. So we're doing a lot of changes in order to set again the environment where people will be free in their judgment, but they must be objective as well. So that's the second priority. The third priority, which is also very important, and it's a great tool of measuring how much light do you have in your room, it's the fight against extremism and anti-Semitism. As you know, Slovakia, we have a history of Slovak state during the Second World War. And there was a moment where Slovak government issued a Jewish codex. It wasn't a good thing. It was a very bad thing. It was against human rights. It was against human dignity. Unfortunately, we have this track record in our history. And that's why our government said we must do something stronger about it. Not just say, yeah, it wasn't good that we did it. We wanted to say to the people on which we issued the Jewish Codex, not us, but the people who were in charge in Slovak state, we said, we are sorry. Please forgive us. And that's why we approved in the government this act of saying sorry and asking for forgiveness for this bad act, in order to move forward in our history. And I think it was very important also action on how to deal with I would say the hurts of history of any nation, any country. And the last thing that I want to say is I would like to go back to the democracy, because democracy, as I said, it's not for granted. Freedom and democracy go hand in hand, but it's not for granted. It's up to us on how we explain, how we act, how we show the freedom, the respect toward each other, how we speak. And that's why I'm so thankful, once again, not just to the minister for organizing this event, but to you all, that you are participating, that you are putting thoughts to this important mission as protection of human rights is, and not just protecting, but developing the human rights everywhere we are. It starts in our families. It starts with our colleagues. And then that's a great laboratory. That's a great training place. And then we can move it forward to the bigger stages, to the bigger podiums, to the bigger forums as this is. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much that you are putting your effort into this. Thank you very much that you're supporting this idea of not just protecting human rights, but developing. And thank you for listening to me, that I could share the priorities of our government. I wish you a pleasant and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It was excellent opening of our conference, and thank you for setting clear the priorities of the government. So thank you for your keynote address. And now I would like to invite Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Mr. Ivan Korčok. Minister, the floor is yours.
Mr. Prime Minister, Madam Minister of Justice, distinguished members of the Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, let me welcome you as well at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, and thank you all for accepting our invitation to participate at this conference. Not easy to speak after Prime Minister, but I'll do my best. I have a dilemma whether I should follow his example and say something from my heart. I'll do that at the end, but let me first follow the notes that I think are important to share with you, because they express what we in the Foreign Ministry are doing when it comes to human rights, and our belief that this is an extremely important part of our foreign policy. Let me start by reminding, especially our friends from abroad, that there are a few days in our history that remind us about the importance of human rights. One of them is today, October 28, the anniversary of the first democratic state in the history of our nation, the first Czechoslovak Republic, which was established today, 103 years ago. It is important to remember it now, when we are deeply concerned about the state of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the world. New megatrends, threats and disruptions, including digital revolution, impact of climate change, increasing inequality, irregular migration, violent extremism, pandemic, so-called infodemic, to name just a few. These phenomena are creating pressures in our societies, both at home and globally. And they are often accompanied by rising nationalism, populism, and shrinking civic and democratic space, and decline of trust in governments and experts. We believe that these tendencies must be vigorously fought against. Support for democracy and rule of law must be reinforced both at home and globally. As our contribution to these international efforts, my ministry decided to adopt, actually I decided to adopt and they followed, a new concept for promoting human rights and democracy. It provides a clear guidance for our values-based foreign policy, which is based on internationally accepted values, standards, and commitments to human rights, democracy, rule of law, and fundamental freedoms. Having said that, however, we have to recognize, it's fair to recognize, that we are all in need of democratic renewal. And therefore, we need to strengthen democratic institutions at home and abroad. We clearly see that where human rights are violated, there is an increasing instability, lack of prosperity, and resilience to withstand new and old challenges. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why this is such an important part of foreign policy. Because human rights and stability and rule of law is clearly a precondition for stability, and this is the Slovak national interest. So therefore, we are standing up for those who are deprived of human rights around the world, because we know it serves our own interest. So there's this linkage between human rights and our national interest. We need to make a self-reflection why democratic systems are losing their support, why in some countries populist and illiberal systems, let me call it once again, that will not make me popular, but I want to say it, illiberal systems are taking over. A renewal of public-private partnership in defending democracy and human rights is needed. And therefore, I welcome the presence of the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, Eamon Gilmore. Welcome to Slovakia. And OSCE Other Director Mateo McCarthy, as well as online statement that will follow by the UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Ilse Brands-Keris. Let me use this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, and welcome the US President Biden's initiative for convening Summit for Democracy. It matches with Slovakia's long-term commitment to advance and protect universal human rights, support democracy, fight corruption, and uphold a rules-based order both at home and abroad. In case of my country, our experience and lessons learned from our mistakes and achievements have inspired several initiatives the Slovak government has undertaken in areas such as fight against corruption or support for free media. We have seen in our recent past that corruption goes hand in hand with erosion of principles of democracy and rule of law, suppression of critical voices of independent media. In line with the EU Human Rights Action Plan, we want to be active internationally when promoting laws and practices that protect freedom of expression and, last but not least, promoting media freedom, pluralism, discouraging interference with impartial or critical reporting. We are ready to continue sharing best practices, but also our bitter experience Prime Minister has referred to, which led to the tragic events when journalist Jan Kuciak was assassinated while doing his important job. Together with our partners, we want to be part of a long-term flagship project for supporting investigative journalism, for revealing corruption, sharing best practices and protection of journalists. That is why we welcome and support the proposal of the European Commission to launch the preparation of a comprehensive EU Media Freedom Act, and we want to be an active participant and contributor in the upcoming legislative process. And finally, Slovakia is putting in place several mechanisms, initiatives and events both at home, in the EU and internationally to prepare an inventory of best practices and tested solutions, which we want to share also through our programs of development cooperation. In this regard, we very much welcome the initiative of the European Commission in securing a greater synergy and impact of those individual programs of EU member states through Team Europe Democracy exercise. I wish to conclude my remarks by reassuring you that we will do our best in translating ambitious objectives of our concept for promoting human rights abroad into very concrete practical steps and active engagement on all fronts in promoting shared values and human rights commitments. I believe this conference provides a great opportunity to generate useful ideas and suggestions, ideas to this end. I wish you a very productive and inspiring discussion, but I need to say something, as I have promised, from my heart. The first one is to say that it is by far not a coincidence or by chance that we have Prime Minister sitting here and Justice Minister. They're here because they're leaders who have a right compass with which they're acting in politics. And for me, it's a privilege to serve in a government where I don't need to explain to Prime Minister why it is important for me as a foreign minister to speak about human rights abroad. He's committed to rule of law. Justice Minister is doing her best into re-establishing justice and rule of law here, but we are committed to supporting human rights abroad. And I'm convinced of it because I believe that we owe it. We owe it to all those in this country, but elsewhere in the world, who were deprived of human rights before 1989. Today we are celebrating establishment of first Czechoslovakia, first state of Czechoslovakia back in 1918. But soon we are going to remember and celebrate November 17th. And human rights and rule of law was exactly about this. How to give back to our people what they were deprived of, my parents, our relatives before 1989. This must not be forgotten. We are living in times where standing up for human rights makes you a weird maverick. It is almost impossible to get through the media, reach out to them and attract their attention to this very area. But that brings me once again to repeating what I've said. Without human rights, there will not be stability. And if there is not stability in the world, we will suffer from that. That will be to the detriment of the well-being, prosperity of our people. So what I'm doing it first to serve the interests of my own country. But once again, this is a joint and common quest for democracy that never ends. And I know, and I will conclude by that, to speak like that today in the world where basically people don't care about those transcendental issues like human rights is very difficult. But we have to do it. I see here Miriam Lexman, and I think it matters a lot when she stands up for human rights in China And I find it ridiculous that she's put on the list, on a sanctioned list for that. So that is why we cannot turn deaf ear to and blind eyes, to what's happening around the world. And that is why, once again, I have decided, and I'm so grateful to people in my ministry who are supporting me in really trying to show a Slovak flag on a world map in our neighborhood when we speak about people in Belarus, because once again we owe it to all those who are not enjoying that comfort of life in freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your personal support to this agenda, and thank you for saying clearly the commitment of Slovakia to do more and more vocal in our foreign policy to promote and protect human rights in the world. Now I would like to invite the Minister of Justice to take the floor and to say us something from her portfolio. Please, Madam.
Now, how it is difficult for me after Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign and European Affairs, but I will try. And it is really my privilege to be here with you, here, because I know that the common values about human rights and European values we just have, and there is no need to discuss it. We just are on the same line. I'm very glad to be here for human rights. Dear Prime Minister, dear Minister for International and European Affairs, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about the international protection of human rights, we tend to emphasize developments shortly after the Second World War. The war supposed to teach us, the humankind, that only through common commitment and collective effort can we become more human, that only through cooperation and loyalty to shared values we can secure a life without fear and want, and that the atmosphere of happiness is not only created at home, nationally, but in broader context, internationally. And at the time, the world has not yet been globalized as it is today. The connections, and even stronger now, and as countries we depend one on another even more. However, when discussing the dawn of international human rights protection, it is perhaps fruitful to focus our attention even before the Second World War, to the beginning of the 19th century. The United Kingdom and other countries, such as the Netherlands or Spain, have concluded treaties restricting the slave trade as part of the wave of the slavery abolition movement. They also established international courts to enforce them. Anti-slavery courts gradually dealt with more than 600 cases, and they released almost 80,000 illegally held and transported slaves. Already before the establishment of internationally anti-slavery courts, some British judges recognized the practice as unjust and unhuman. Even in times when slavery was common and widespread, there were people and nations that freed themselves from the paradigms of their times, and they saw the future. In Slovak language, we sometimes use the idiom in this context, to be able to see what is around the corner. In the European context, the change in the perception of human was boosted, for example, by Kant and later by the Enlightenment. This transformation of the concept of the person and humankind gradually enabled us to see the injustice of social institutions. Of course, it took another decade for slavery to be abolished, but gradually we all recognize that the dignity and value of another person cannot be humiliated in such a way, and that we cannot humiliate ourselves by humiliating others. Human rights are dynamic because our perspective becomes more and more human. We see more and more clearly, and we make moral discoveries. At the European level, this concept of human rights is mirrored in the doctrine of the Living Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. If other countries of the Council of Europe move forward in the protection of human rights, we shall follow them. This is also the aspect of the collective protection of rights. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Justice performs many more or less technical and administrative, but also political conceptual roles towards institutions and people whose task is to deliver justice. Sometimes it really takes us a long time. Justice might be late. And it is not just the matter of undue delays in court trials. Even if our governments strive to address also this issue in the proposal of the reform of judiciary, or in the measure the Prime Minister of the, and as well as Minister Korčok spoke about it. Slavery, we understood that cannot be accepted. We understood that women may have a vote. Now we have to understand that people of LGBTI community are equal beings as the other human beings. Sometimes it really takes longer to recognize that some social conditions are unfair. However, from the bird's-eye point of the view on history, the progress in human rights and democracy is in fact amazing. There are also so many examples, even if there is still backsliding. When I see as my role as Minister for Justice, what I perceive as our role at the Justice Department, the role of lawyers and other agents of justice, is to pursue and promote the human right view of the world and the human condition, to celebrate ourselves for respect, to perceiving the dignity of others, and I guess some kind of softness and kindness in the way we relate to one another. If we are looking for a new human rights platform at this conference, we can perhaps find such a platforms in ourselves. We, as the sources of respect for others, can become such a platform. I wish you, and I wish the people in the justice sector, and I also wish to myself the success in this regard. Have an enjoyable and fruitful time together. Thank you.